Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Christy Grant Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox, and this week we're covering how far the U.S. should push Europe when it comes to banning goods produced with forced labor, whether Canadians are just too darn nice when it comes to bribery, the Supreme Court's review of when cash given to a U.S. politician crosses the line from thank you gift to bribe, Florida man's notice to police officers that he'd be drinking his beer before being arrested because it is cold and delicious. But first, Tom, how has your week been and what is the most interesting development?
So it's been a very good week so far. I was a part of a podcaster virtual conference on AI and podcasting.
Oh,
And it just really opened my eyes to what you can do with AI now. So now I have to figure out how to bring that over to compliance, but it was really insightful for me. So that was my fun development. How about you?
um, it's sunny. It hasn't been sunny in Southern California. It's been lying to us about how the weather is supposed to be. So we're springing is sprunging as it was, I think, for you a couple of weeks ago, Tom. So it feels like the whole world is opening up.
Oh, good. Well, that
What?
really leads into our first story.
The climate change. Go ahead.
Climate change. Yeah. So this story comes to us from, frankly, a great resource, which is the Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance. And it is largely practitioners, although some academicians post in here, and there are 2 to 3 articles a day on corporate governance. And if you don't subscribe to it, please do so. It's a great resource and it's free. But this article struck me because it summarized the claims against the SEC's final climate rules. And there are 19 state attorneys generals who have filed petitions for review. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has filed a petition for review, and the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensations and other states' attorneys generals have filed petitions for review. These were all in different circuits, and they've been consolidated in the Eighth Circuit. The general challenges, or the primary basis for the challenges, are that under the Administrative Procedures Act, the rulemaking by the SEC was arbitrary and capricious, and that the Congress has not delegated to the SEC the right to rule on this because it's really a major political or issue or one of economic significance. Well, I mean, I think every rule by the SEC covers that. The Supreme Court is debating whether to overturn the Chevron doctrine. The Chevron doctrine gives deference to an agency such as the SEC's reasonable interpretation of an ambiguous statute. If that ruling is overturned, that will frankly put the courts, every decision by an agency will be subject to court review. And finally, there's a group who says that under the First Amendment, petitioners could take the position that the SEC's final rules violate corporate free speech, but that seems to be pretty far down the road. So those are the legal basis for the claims. Of course, all of this is going to the U.S. Supreme Court. The authors note parenthetically that the EU has more stringent and effective and in place climate reporting rules. So if you're a major multinational, you're going to have to follow those anyway. So that's sort of where we are. I just really wanted to kind of summarize because this has obviously been a topic that's gone back and forth over the past several weeks, but it really was a great article summarizing where we are, and it gave me an opportunity to highlight the Harvard site because it's really great on corporate governance.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting, Tom. I agree with you. And I think, first of all, it's interesting that the SEC voluntarily stayed its rules, waiting until the Eighth Circuit rules and then probably the Supreme Court rules. I think that was smart. I think that they were right in their assessment that it would be kind of crazy for companies to try to be dealing with this while it was all going through the court system. But last time we talked about this, Tom, you said that you think that the SEC's rule will be reinstated. And if I got out my crystal ball, I think that the courts are going to kick it back to Congress under the major questions doctrine and basically say, you know what? If Congress wants you to regulate this, then Congress can say so. And until they do, forget it. But you have a different opinion. You think differently still?
Yeah, I think the SEC, it's not arbitrary and capricious. It was put out for rulemaking. We discussed that proposed rule on this podcast. The final rule did not encompass the original proposed rule. So it clearly shows the SEC took some commentary to heart. There were three parts to the original rule, and only parts one and two were part of the final rule. So I think it's going to be upheld. I think it would be utter chaos if the Supreme Court did make that ruling. And I think the chaos the Supreme Court is creating has become clearer and clearer as they create more chaos. And they can't take this country back 90 years and wipe out 90 years of jurisprudence.
Can't or shouldn't?
Well, they certainly shouldn't. And I don't think they can do so.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens on that one. We're going to find out a lot actually by the end of June from the cases that are in front of them right now. So hold on tight. But you were talking about Europe, so let's move over there right now. And that is interesting because we're still dealing with the US, but we're dealing with the Congress, where several members of the House have been asking the State Department to put pressure on the UK and the EU to take a harder line on forced labor in China. So basically, this was surprising to me given the EU's focus on so many human rights related activities and their laws, really, like the CSRD. However, the US is far ahead when it comes specifically to the challenges of forced labor in China. This may change because the EU Parliament is set to vote this month on a broad ban targeting the import of goods linked to forced labor from around the world, and that will, of course, include China. So this effort has been years in the making, but there is concern that it may fall apart. Our friends in Germany may not be interested in this one, just like they didn't like the CSDDD originally. And people are concerned that if the EU fails to pass the proposal, that goods made with forced labor could be shipped into Europe and then moved to the States. So two members of the House asked the State Department to consider establishing a joint EU, US, UK forced labor enforcement task force, which I find very exciting. I like this concept. In the meantime, the House members have asked the State Department to put pressure on our European allies to pass this law. So, Tom, the most interesting thing about this article for me was the description of the split supply chains that some companies are employing to get around the US ban on goods from the Uyghur region. So apparently, some companies are creating clean versions of goods to ship to the US and then making products with forced labor that are then sent into other markets. Good for them. My goodness. Whew. If the largest trading bloc in the world, which is the EU, is off the list of places those goods can go, I think this would be a great thing. What are your thoughts?
Ditto, said Tweedledee. Ditto, said Tweedledum. Absolutely spot on, Christy. And it's an approach that's absolutely necessary because of exactly what you said. And forced labor is one of the great travesties and injustices of the modern world. And anything we can do to stop that, slow it down, impact it, disrupt it, make it illegal, do anything to stop it, we should do. And the EU should step up and be at least as robust as the United States in this arena.
Absolutely. All right. We're moving now from the EU, the UK, the US to Canada. Not a usual suspect on this program. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you rarely see a cultural stereotype played out as directly as this blog post from the Global Anti-Corruption blog. He is one of the top blogs around. I can't remember when they started, 2013, 2014, 2015, sometime in there. But great writing, great guest posts, great co-editing on the blog. And this one asks, is Canada too nice to enforce its own anti-corruption law, which is the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act, CFPOA. And the author, one Hussein Awan, really is not happy with the lack of enforcement by Canada and their track record in enforcing the CFPOA because he compares it to the US's track record under the FCPA. He advocates three efforts, which are three initiatives that he believes could help. One is to increase funding for the anti-corruption agencies, which largely has been my favorite group from Canada, the Mounties, or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCM. Second, that Canada should have a multi-agency enforcement model, such as in the US under the DOJ and SEC. And then third, Canada should increase and strengthen its whistleblower protection, which the OECD has identified as a major defect in Canada's legal framework. I'm not sure those three things would work in Canada. I don't know about the funding issue, but the DOJ SC uh, binary enforcement, I'm not sure that improves enforcement or not. It's an anomaly of US law between civil and criminal enforcement. And so I'm not sure there's really a need for anti-foreign, anti-corruption updates to the Canadian law. Maybe it's that Canadian companies just don't bribe as much as US companies. That's a distinct possibility. But there's a cultural stereotype to say a nation is too nice to enforce its own laws. I could not believe that.
I'm now imagining the mounted police like running into a country and saying, "Wait, stop the bribery." I mean, that would be fantastic, like on the horses with the outfits. I kind of love that
Oh,
idea. Um,
well, except they would say, please stop the bribery.
pretty please. Yes, you don't think, Tom. So, in another one of the cases, the mayor of Portage, Indiana, is appealing his conviction for bribery after the city awarded a $1.1 million contract to a dealership the mayor was calling and texting with frequently at the time. And after the contract was awarded, the dealership gave the mayor a check for $13,000. He says it was a down payment for future consulting projects. Sure. But Tom, the best quote in this article had to come from the good mayor's attorney who said, quote, Congress did not plausibly subject all of these people to 10 years in prison for just accepting gifts, unquote. So really, Tom, is it that only true with foreign officials in the FCPA, or is this actually meant to catch people who take money from undercover FBI agents?
Well, it's distinctly territorial. It's outside the United States, clearly illegal.
Hmm.
Inside the United States, it's just a gift. It can be for apparently multiple reasons for the gift, but for that legal term, if you've heard that, yeah, this is just incredibly inane. And this Supreme Court seems to be on the verge of saying if there's any plausible reason, real, unreal, articulated, not articulated, or other, we're going to let it pass. There's no such thing as corruption unless perhaps you're still handwriting checks where you note in the memo section or bribe.
For bribe.
Perhaps that's, but maybe then not. So, yeah, it's just incredible what they have done. They've completely eviscerated anti-corruption laws inside the US, and they appear, I don't know if it's because they want to protect themselves or that they just don't want to do something about this problem, but they are letting it go crazy.
Indeed. Well, Tom, why don't you talk to me about what the opposite of right is? I'm pretty sure we just did that, but why don't you tell me about a variation on what the opposite is of right?
Well, this comes to us from our good friend, Jeff Kaplan. And Jeff has, of course, the conflict of interest blog. And this just, I thought, was a really interesting article. And I'm not sure I agree with Jeff's theory, but if Jeff Kaplan writes about it, I think it needs to be considered by compliance professionals. That's how much respect I have for Jeff. And is the opposite of right being rushed. And he uses that to lead into a discussion about undue pressure. And where I really differ from Jeff on this is kind of the following, and it may be, my own makeup. It may be the professional milieu that we both grew up in. Maybe it was law school. We were always under pressure. That's the very nature of what we did. You were an associate at a law firm. I was an associate at a law firm. You've been in the corporate world. I've been in the corporate world. You have your own business
I
now.
was
I have
gonna
my own
say,
business now.
pressure and hurry. Are you
Uh,
kidding me? Welcome to my
uh,
life.
yeah, you're always under pressure. It doesn't matter if you're a lawyer in private practice. It doesn't matter if you're a compliance officer in a corporation. It doesn't matter if you're a business owner. There's always pressure. What I did like he pointed out was the response to pressure is to have a decision-making process and to follow that decision-making process. Or as my wife would say, every process must be validated by a second set of eyes, meaning whether that's called proofreader, whether that's called your business partner, whether that's the committee to approve a acceptance of a third party agent, putting a second set of eyes on a decision, I think adds to the validation of the decision and it slows the process down somewhat. Hopefully doesn't put it to a stop. But I think we I think that's the nature of what professionals do. And it's how you act under pressure that differentiates, in my mind, the quality of the professional you are. And that is, do you have an internal or external process that you follow with rigor that can be documented, that a second set of eyes can look at to validate? And there's documentation if someone later in the form of a regulator, your CEO, outside counsel, or other wants to review it. So the part I agreed on is having a process, but I just have never worked anywhere where I didn't feel like I was under pressure.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that he had some really interesting points of view, but the one that I latched onto was his idea that training should include what to do when you're feeling hurried, rushed, pressured, etc. And it's interesting because when we develop training, like for compliance competitor, we always include a scenario where the employee has already done something in a hurry, approved something they shouldn't have already, didn't follow the process, looked through it fast, but didn't actually read the memo, all those types of things that are real life. So I think he's got a really strong point there. People should think about what happens when they're under pressure and moving quickly, especially when it comes to making mistakes and covering them up. So I like that. Thank you to Mr. Kaplan. Some interesting stuff going on at the DOJ from their pilot programs. That must be their favorite word. We've had a lot of pilots lately. I'm looking at an article from JD Supra, and it's titled The Department of Justice Unveils Groundbreaking Pilot Program Incentivizing Whistleblowers with Immunity. So, as the title lets on, the DOJ has a new pilot program wherein individual whistleblowers can get immunity if they give the DOJ original non public information about various forms of wrongdoing, including FCPA violation. So, is this controversial? Well, it is. And that's because the whistleblowers may be given immunity even if they were personally involved in the crime. Now, there are limits to this. So, if the person was the architect of the crime, they can't take advantage of immunity. And if you're the CEO or CFO of the company, probably not. But nearly everyone else is a yes. So, the person must voluntarily disclose the crime, fully cooperate throughout the investigation or prosecution. It's a big step toward expanding the beloved self disclosure bubble even further. So, what do you think of this, Tom? Is it controversial to extend non prosecution agreements and immunity to people involved in the crimes, or is this just like any other immunity thing and kind of makes sense?
I've seen it go both ways. The IRS does allow it. I don't think the SEC does allow it under Dodd Frank. We had Mary Inman on a podcast, and she advocated that for more information to get to the government, you need to have an incentive for those, even those who may have been a part of the crime, to come forward. If they do come forward, I have to believe there will be consequences to their actions, meaning they won't get a clean slate. But if you got multi-millions of dollars, maybe you're willing to take a 12-month probation. I don't know. Um, I guess I could have seen it go either way. I was surprised a little bit that
Hmm.
with the criminal focus of the Department of Justice, at least in the criminal division, that they would embrace this. But I think it's going to be a boon for the DOJ. I think it's going to make our colleagues who are in house in compliance under even more pressure. So perhaps they'll have to read Jeff Kaplan's article again to understand how to deal with pressure. But I think it's going to make everyone's job in house harder, and that you have to have the internal controls, the whistleblower protections, and just data analytics in place to try to pick up anomalies before they become full blown illegal acts under the FCPA or other corporate criminal enforcement actions.
Lots of challenges for them. You know what else is challenging for them? Trying to deal with dueling sanctions regimes. Why don't you tell us about the good fun of our China US issues?
Sure. So this comes to us from the China Law blog. Once again, just a great blog. It is exactly what the name is. It's China Law Issues. It is authored by a variety of practitioners at the Harris Solowski law firm. And it's been sort of my go to resource to learn about China law literally for 15 years. So I wanted to pull an article from this and really emphasize the pressure and the difficulty of dealing and balancing US and China regulations. There's a clear labyrinth right now on both or three areas: export control, data privacy, and intellectual property. The thing I learned, Christy, in doing business with the Chinese in the '04 to '07 timeframe is number one, they're always going to steal your IP, period. End of statement. Expect it. It's not a risk you can mitigate or manage, rather. You can mitigate that risk, though, by making available to them second or third generation technology. So if you're selling 5-year-old technology that's been superseded once or twice, that's the best thing I can say to get around it. Obviously, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act and other acts in the United Kingdom and the EU are going to put greater pressure in that area because the Chinese virulently oppose those. And then data privacy. The rules are very different in the United States and in China, and it's incredibly difficult to get data out of China. You may be able to get it inside of China, but even that may be problematic for you. So go into this with eyes wide open. The author suggests some strategies to navigate the maze of having supply chain diversification, strategic sourcing at literally places across the globe, a compliance technology investment that allows you to automate tasks and improve data management, and then legal and diplomatic engagement. I had the opportunity to interview a lawyer from Hughes Hubbard's China law practice, and she said the biggest thing that she tries to counsel clients is keep talking. Yeah, it may be painful. In the US, might want me to send a demand letter, but the Chinese, they want to do business, and the Chinese companies want to do business. And it may not be what you wanted, and it may be something less than you think you're entitled to under a legal remedy, but you may lose that business. You may lose the right to do business in China. Your property may be expropriated. So always keep talking and try to come to an accommodation. Of course, overlaid with everything in China is the Chinese Communist Party. So if your company is deemed to have something the Chinese Communist Party wants, or it makes it a national security issue, that's another level, but that's part of the diplomatic engagement that the author suggests. So it's not, I'm not even sure it's a multidimensional chess game. It is one of the most complicated situations I have seen in the last 20 years. The only thing that maybe would come close was Iran, but probably not because the US government, in the late first decade of this year made the decision, you better not be doing business in Iran. And here we're getting mixed signals from our government. Should you be in China or not? So get as good a counsel as you can, be in it for the long haul. They're going to steal your IP. Just be ready and try to protect yourself from a sourcing standpoint as much as you can if you lose that sourcing.
TikTok, 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 right? Last night, the ban on TikTok, I think it was signed today, potentially stopping it or forcing its sale. That's going to be interesting. I'm sure that will not help in this whole US China problems that we're having. Yes, I had to deal with this when I was the director of compliance at Europe, the Middle East, and Africa for Carlson Michael Travel. And we were fined $6 million by OFAC because when JP Morgan took over as the majority owner, nobody thought about the fact that they were going to be subject to US sanction. And the French love going on vacation to Cuba. So suddenly we had the $6 million fine because of the Cuban business from the French. And I had to go to France and say, yeah, you can't do that anymore. And it was not a pleasant experience. So the back and forth sanctions issues are real. And for all you compliance officers handling them, whether in China or someone else, I salute you because it is not easy. Uh, shall we move from one hard topic to another, which is
Cer- Certainly.
this is how to deliver criticism. It's an article from the Washington Post, and it's titled "From Gen Z to Boomers: How to Give Critical Feedback at Work." Now, I didn't know that I was supposed to treat different generations differently when we have to tell them that their spelling is awful or they can't be so combative in the office, but apparently I was wrong. So here's the rundown. For boomers, respecting their experience and expectation around a formal process is important. So you're to make it a proper meeting. For the Gen Xers, be direct and transparent. For millennials, apply a more informal coaching or mentorship approach. And for our friends, the Gen Zs, involve them in finding a solution to the problem and make sure you're personally invested in giving them this feedback. So apparently, there are some things that all the generations do have in common, though the feedback should be specific, measurable, action oriented, timely, and results focused. Well, that all sounds exhausting. So, personally, I really struggle with giving direct feedback. Basically, I want everyone to be happy and feel good about themselves. So I don't like to tell them they did a bad job. I think that's the millennial Gen X cusper in me, kind of in both sides. Do you struggle with giving critical or negative feedback at work?
Well, I think I've told you this before, but my boss is just an absolute jerk.
Nightmare.
And he's a nightmare, no boundaries, clocks you're an idiot or worse, dressed up and down. It's just terrible. So, yeah, it's ugly. So I have that experience as the employee. For my VAs who work in the Philippines, I am incredibly tolerant, largely because they both speak English very well, but I still see just some differences in their interpretation of English being non-English first speakers and mine. And so I try to go out of my way. I don't try. I go out of my way not to criticize and and like verb tenses, you know, for plural and singular. And you and I grew up with those rules and we know what they are. But we've been learning them since we were in the third grade. And they don't. They haven't had that. And so they're continually putting a plural verb with a singular subject or vice versa. So, things like that, I think, misspellings, going to give a lot more patience with that once again because of the language difference. And once I sort of made that decision, I was almost their teacher or mentor rather than their supervisor. So that's really been my experience. But, my boss, Jesus Christ. So I don't know.
I don't know. You should probably take that one to HR, Tom.
There you go. There you go.
All right. I really want to hear your thoughts on this next one because I was all over the place with this. What is going on with the shadow trading verdict?
Okay, Matthew Panuwat was an executive at Medivation, an oncology-focused biopharmaceutical company, and he learned that Medivation was expected to be acquired. Now, that's material, non-public information, and he did not trade on that. But what he did trade on was another company that he heard might be in play, unrelated to the acquisition of his company, and that other company was called Insight Corporation. He made about $120,000 with this information. So he got the information. It was confidential information that he got at Medivation. Once again, Insight was not an acquisition target, but he had agreed to keep confidential information he was presented. And he'd signed that was part of his employment contract. So we had a situation where material non-public information of a third party that he had no contract with, no duty to, that was enough for an insider trading conviction. And I think it was because I assume this trial lawyer maxim translates, which is bad facts make bad law. And I think these were very bad facts. And I think we got some bad law out of it. Because what is material non-public information? If I research it, however I research it, and it becomes known to me, is that public information or is it non-public information? What's the source of that information? Do I have to take into account that source of information? If I want to go be an investment advisor and they say, Fox, go off and find me five companies that I should invest in or sell short. And I research and I research and I come up with something and I invest in it. Is that now illegal? It's really taken insider trading a level further. We had the chance to visit with Karen Woody on this, one of the country's top securities law and insider trading legal experts. And we bandied about, do you need to ban all trading of your competitors now because of the inside information that you have? And I know you were in the entertainment industry for some time. Well, in the energy industry, basically everybody knew what everybody else was doing. And then when you got outside the United States and in the expat communities, we all ate dinner together. We all barbecued together. We went to the beach together. We rode bikes together and we all talked together, played golf together. So in the expat community, and that kind of information was always going back and forth. Now, if it's a trade secret, there was generally not discussion around that. But in terms of commercial terms of deals and who was doing well, everybody knew. So I think this case, because of the facts, the SEC was able to get a pretty quick verdict, which demonstrates the jury bought their side of the case. But for me, it may take us down a road that makes good investigative work look like insider trading going forward.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, those are all good points. And yes, working in the entertainment industry where it's quite literally the joint venture of Paramount and Universal Pictures, and the executives are supposed to shut down one hat for the other whenever they're talking to each, was a fun antitrust experiment. So, and not that I'm saying that anyone ever violated an antitrust law. Let's not be very clear that I'm not saying that, because I was the compliance officer, and also they were very good. But that was always a challenge, right? Okay, so when we're talking about this, the article focused a lot on the insider traders trading policy that the company had. And the article warns that companies should review their policies to ensure that they, quote, accurately describe the scope of activities intended to be prohibited, unquote. And I just thought, is that really something that either the SEC focused on or that anyone else did? Because essentially, the insider trading policy at the company said that it expanded the idea of material non public information very broadly. Does that, who cares? Do you think that matters? And do you think this is something that compliance officers need to worry about, opening up their insider trading policy and reviewing it for language? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think they have to. And I
Okay.
think they have to train their employees on it. And they have to incorporate the almost the jury instructions in the Panuak case into their presentations and make their employees understand this. If you do this on another company and invest, you may well be subject to insider trading laws. So I think absolutely they have to.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between training on the facts of this and what you're allowed to not to do, and that wording of your policy. I guess that's where I kept getting tripped up was, does it actually matter what your policy's wording is, or does it actually matter that they understand you can't trade in the same industry or competitor stock if you have material non-public information?
I think it's both because think you have to set the expectation and the policy, and then it's your and my job to train on it.
Interesting. I like it, Tom. I like it. All right. I like it. And I'm going to move to something else I like, which is, of course, the antics of Florida man. Here we go. So, this Florida man was having a really bad night. In fact, it was so bad that it called for a drink. So, Florida man Brent McPeak found himself arguing with his neighbor, and it escalated to the point where one neighbor threatened the other with a gun. So, officers arrived, and while they were trying to sort out what happened, Mr. McPeak came out of his house and fired multiple shots in the air. So you can imagine how quickly the police ran over to Mr. McPeak, who was sitting outside his house now without his gun. And he had gone inside in the interim to grab a nice cold beer. And the officers came toward him with their guns. Mr. McPeak, he wasn't concerned. He said, look, whoa, I'm cracking this beer, okay? I'm not going to bother you. The beer is cold, sir, and I want to drink it, unquote, which he did. Unfortunately for him, that may be the last one he's going to have for a while. He was charged with using a firearm while under the influence of alcohol and aggravated assault. Tom, the only unusual part of the story is that it didn't include the famous phrase, hold my beer and watch this. So good for you, Florida man, for keeping your priorities straight. We understand you.
A cold beer on a hot day in Florida, it's almost a religion.
It almost is. Thank you for joining us on the Two Gurus Talk Compliance. I'm Christy Grant Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.